and welcome everyone to the TrueBrand Life podcast, where we talk about living a transparent, righteous, unconditional, empowering lifestyle. I am your host, Shakir. Today, I have a special guest with me, my good friend Maya. She is a wonderful colleague, mother, and friend. Today, she and I will discuss deconstructing your faith. What prompted this discussion was a quote by Todd Delaney. Let me pull it up. There comes a point in most church kids' lives where we must detox from church culture to really discover the true heart of God. Some things we learned we never really never really him at all. So everyone welcome my special guest Maya coming into the chat. Hey
Hi.
Maya.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Welcome. Can you still
Thank
hear
you.
me?
Thank you for having me. I hear you now.
Good. Good. So let's get into it. So Maya, tell us your story. Where did it all begin for you?
Well, do you want to hear, like the start of my religious story, like my religious life, that story?
Yeah, you could tell me about that, or tell me about your upbringing and how religion folded into it. Were you born into it like some of us? I know with me, I didn't start going to church until I was like in third grade. That was like something new for me. What's your story?
Okay. Well, my parents weren't religious when they got married, but my mom started studying with Jehovah's Witnesses when I was about 1 years old. So I basically grew up in that. She got baptized as a witness in 1985. So I would have been about like 7 then, So that's when we
Mhm.
really started to do things. But that's been, that was our religion from then on. My father never became a Jehovah's Witness. Um, and just like a little bit of background about me when I was a kid, it was just my parents, my sister, and I. We lived in a pretty affluent neighborhood. We didn't have much interaction with either my father's family or my mother's family, so we were a pretty closed unit of people. The only other person that we had too much interaction with was my grandmother, who at one point came and lived with us. She probably lived with us for like 15 years.
Oh wow.
Like maybe from the time I was like 10, she stayed with us and she still lives with my parents right now. So she's been living with them for a very long time. So that was our little family unit. It was small, quiet, for a while, and then my mother introduced us to the Jehovah's Witness religion.
Okay. So, with your mom being introduced to the Jehovah Witness, is her family a part of that religion as well, or is it just her?
It's just her. There is no one on her side of the family, and she has a pretty large family. She's not that close with them, but they're religious. Some of them are Baptist, various Christian religions, but no one else is a Jehovah's Witness. So she did that completely by herself. A friend introduced her to the witnesses, and she was introduced to someone who studied the Bible with her. Um, and she studied for about 4 years before becoming baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. So,
Oh wow. Because I was wondering because I know sometimes like you'll probably go into further discussion about how the witnesses come to the door. So in my mind frame, that's what I was thinking. That did they come to the door and she was received them and that's how it went, or was it someone that she know that she decided to become a witness?
that's a good question. Yeah, it wasn't from door to door because like most people, when witnesses would come to her door, she would just stay away from the door. So it was a friend of hers who said, that I don't know, she met somebody and she thought my mom would be interested in what she was studying, and that's how she, ended up studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. So it was kind of like a backdoor way that she found her way in.
Okay. So, about what age did you guys really start getting into the religion of being a witness, you and your sister?
Well, what happened was my mom was a very successful businesswoman. And so even though, she got baptized in 1985, she really was focused on work. She made a lot of money. She had a really good job. She was in like upper management. But then she got sick. And I want to say she got sick around when I was in the third grade. And my sister is about 2 years younger than me. So my sister would have been in the first grade. And she was so sick that she was out of work for about a year. And after that, when she went back to work and she kind of got herself together, I think she had sort of like a life change for her. She must have been in her 40s, maybe her early 40s at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And she basically eventually decided to quit her job because she had saved up enough money, and she kind of threw herself into being a witness full time. So I'd say probably by the time I was like 12 years old, we were fully immersed in the religion, and that was really what we did all the time. Prior to that, we had more of a life outside of the religion. We had friends outside of the religion. But at that point, when she decided to, they call it pioneer, which is when you're engaged in a preaching activity. At that time, it was 90 hours a month. When she started that and she quit her job, um, basically our life started to revolve around the religion.
Okay. And as a child, what are some things that you learned within the religion that that made an impact or that kind of stayed with you?
Well, it's a very like immersive experience, I guess I would say. Um, the things I remember from when I was a kid was that there were always people around. When you're a witness, you know a lot of people because even though you go to one kingdom hall, which is like their name for the church, all of the kingdom halls are connected. It's like a system of kingdom halls. So you'll end up knowing people probably most witnesses within like 10 or 20 miles of you. You'll know them personally, and you'll meet many other witnesses from sometimes all over the country, from other countries, because it's very connected. So that part was kind of nice, that there's lots of kids. I remember when I was a little kid, there was so many little kids in the Kingdom Hall. They used to have parties for us, costume parties, things like that. Um, and on the other side, the other thing that really impressed me a lot was that there's a lot of talk about doomsday, the end of the world, and the witnesses have their uh, like monthly magazines that they give out, and the witnesses study that magazine, the Watchtower magazine, every Sunday. And when I was a kid, the pictures in the magazine were like pictures of fire and lightning bolts and sick kids and people running and like pictures of like the end of the world, and it was really scary.
That has to be scary because as you were talking, it reminded me of the different watchtowers that that my parents or family members had received, and looking at them, and they were really graphic pictures of of people in famine, people dying, somebody flying out of the sky, like murder and everything. So that had to be very kind of scary as a child to see those things and to be thinking about the end of the world and not knowing that whatever day is going to come, because they always preached
Y-
about it's coming soon.
exactly. In fact, that was the biggest message, was that it's the end is coming soon. Everything that you do is revolved around, the end is coming. So that really affected our life choices, you
Mm-hmm.
know, as we got older. Because at the time the idea was that I won't get too deep into the doctrine because the doctrine in the witness religion changes a lot. But at that time, basically, the calculation was that the world would be ending within maybe 10 years, right? So what kept getting told to me and kids my age was that we were never going to make it to high school. Armageddon was coming. We wouldn't get to high school. So
Wow.
imagine our surprise when we got to high school. And then they said to us, "Oh, you're never going to have to go to college. You're not even going to have to worry about getting a job." I remember my babysitter saying that to me, that we're so lucky because we would never have to, get a job or do anything in this world because Armageddon was coming. So as you could tell, once you get to high school and then you have to leave high school and there's no Armageddon, it starts to mess with your head.
The funny thing is that you said this that kind of stuck with me just now, that you said that you won't get into the doctrine because it's something that's kind of changed over time. And like you said, it's something that plays with your mind. Like you're told, like, oh, you won't be able to finish high school. Then you finish it. Then it's like, okay, you won't even finish college. Okay, then you finish it. So what's next? Do I not have kids? Okay, now I have kids. What's next? Do I not get married? Do I not see my grandchildren? Like, what's next? And that has to be like, mentally, that would stress me out. That would stress me out because I know even with being in the Christian faith, hearing about being left behind. I'll never forget the movie about being left behind. Every time when I saw that movie or thought about it, I always said, Lord, please forgive me for my sins, because I don't want to be I don't want to be here when the rapture comes. But to kind of think about it every single day or every single time, like, okay, I'm about to be left behind again, that has to be scary. So growing up in the faith like that, what was it, something that's like into your adulthood now, what was your frustration about it, like thinking about it as a kid? What was your frustration about that, like far as a child? And then we can get into like what your perspective is now as an adult.
Um, I think when I was a child, besides being scared to death, it was a very controlled environment. You know what I mean? And I've heard other people in other churches have this experience. You could only wear certain kind of clothes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, have to be conservative clothes. Whether that's your style or not, you don't have a choice about that. We were not allowed to basically have friends with people who were not in our religion.
Wow.
So you could go to school if you want to, public school, but you're not supposed to, bring any of those people home. You don't go to any parties with them or have anything to do with them outside of the school day. So my mom, we stuck pretty close to that. So as you can imagine, it was lonely, you know, isolated. And then there are a lot of decisions that you make as you're getting older. They told us that we weren't allowed to get certain types of jobs.
Mm-hmm.
If your job has anything to do with politics or the police or anything that they don't like, you're not supposed to do that job. You're not allowed to marry a person who's not a witness. You were not supposed to go to college. Um, Otherwise, you would get labeled as a bad Christian.
Oh,
And
wow.
some decisions, if you made some decisions that kind of went against the rules, you could get kicked out of the religion, which is a very big deal. Because Jehovah's Witnesses, they call it disfellowshipping. And that basically means that if you get kicked out or disfellowshipped, your parents won't talk to you, your siblings won't talk to you, nobody in the congregation will talk to you. And since you don't have any friends outside of the religion, it can be really devastating to people when that happens to them.
Wow. Now, like, as far as were there different standards between male and females?
Oh, yeah, you know it. Because, like with many Christian religions, it's, men are the head of the household, right?
Mhm.
Men are under Christ, and women are supposed to be subject to men and everyone's favorite word, submissive. It's hard to even spit that
Yeah.
out. Right? Yeah. And in the Jehovah's Witness religion, at the Kingdom Hall, women are not allowed to really be on stage they can't preach on stage,
Wow.
they can't hold any responsibilities in the Kingdom Hall. They can't even hand out literature magazines to people. They can't, you know, walk up and down the aisles and pass the microphone to anyone. They can't have any responsibilities whatsoever. Basically, as a woman, as you're growing up, the only thing held out to you is that you can have the chance to marry a man who has some kind of prominence in the Kingdom Hall. That's basically it.
Child. That's a lot, especially coming from a culture, an American culture of women being independent, women taking the stand, women being in the front, women not being in the background. And there's nothing wrong with being submissive. There's nothing wrong with taking that role. But to be trained that way is very it's kind of like discouraging, because it's like, is that what my life is all about? Like, as a female, is just to be 5 steps behind a man and not and bear children? Is that it?
I know. And I think my sister and I were fortunate because my dad is not a witness, you know? So we kind of had the balance side because he was always encouraging us to be independent, you know, and to learn things for ourselves. Because if I look at some people whose entire family was Jehovah's Witnesses, a lot of the girls, like, their whole goal starting probably at 15 and 16 was to get married. Like, that was it. And many, many people get married in that religion, you know, by the time they're 20, 21, you know,
Wow.
because especially for the girls, like, there's nothing else really held out for them, you know, to, you know, everyone's looking for success in life, you know,
Right.
and the only way to, like, quote unquote success for a woman as a witness is to marry the right guy.
That's crazy, because often now, especially with hearing the different conversations that men are having, that, and I'm about to refer to him, but he passed away, Kevin Samuels. I never listened to him, but just hearing the fact of, if you're 35, like, it's pretty much over for you. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm about to be 35 soon too. Is it over for me? Like, is it not that we can be successful women and be married as well and be submissive to our husband? Because women can do that, because it's not in my foresight to be any role as a man. Like, I don't want to lead no household. I'm not interested in that, but
Right.
just hearing a whole religion and a culture of, like, look, you're a female and this is what's there for you. That's kind of very discouraging, because God did give us a brain. If it wasn't for women coming, some of this stuff, wouldn't be. It's crazy.
Exactly. I'll tell you a funny story. Like I said, most people were married by the time they were 20, 21. So I found myself being like 25 and not married. And I was in a congregation with people who mostly spoke Spanish. And so that's even like kind of a layer on top of that because they have their own cultural things about marriage. Most of them got married when they were 16, 17, 17, 18.
Right.
But anyway, so here I am 25 years old and I'm getting treated like I'm an old maid. Done. Too old to meet a man, never going to get married. Somebody told me, this elder, that's what they call the ministers, he was like, Maya, you're never going to get married. So you might as well just go and preach overseas, you know, because you're never going to have a husband, you know.
He said it's over for you. Over.
It's over. It's done. 25.
Done. Zilp. Over for you. No more. Eggs dried up. 25.
So yeah, it was a crazy, crazy, crazy culture.
Crazy. Well, now as an adult, how do you view as far as being a Jehovah's Witness? What are some things that that you kind of like you kind of take with you? Let's start off on the positive note. What are some things that you take away from the religion, if there's anything positive?
I think the one positive thing is that because, like I said, the congregations are so interconnected, right? They call it a worldwide brotherhood. And I have to give them that they do have a structure where the you can literally get on a plane, go to a foreign country, show up at a kingdom hall somewhere, and people will welcome you and probably will, you know, help find you somewhere to stay. And because of that, you have opportunities to do interesting things. So like I said, I left my home congregation when I was 18 and I went to a Spanish speaking congregation,
Mm-hmm.
and so I learned how to speak Spanish like that. And then I was able to go to the Dominican Republic, and we were preaching in the Dominican Republic, but we spent 2 weeks basically on vacation there too at the same time. Meet a lot of people from different cultures, just open yourself up to things. So I know how to salsa dance. I know how to make, Puerto Rican style, like rice and beans and things like that, which I would never be able to know that if I hadn't, been a witness. So I think that was positive.
Right.
That was a nice thing. Yeah.
And you know what, like thinking about the Christian faith too, speaking on that, that's something that we do lack because we have Black churches and Black churches only, and that's all we do is fellowship with Black churches. We have white churches, Spanish churches. We don't really get a chance to engage. And I know before the pandemic, that's something that my pastor was really adamant about, that we fellowship with other faiths. And for us to even call ourselves Christians, and for us to even call ourselves that we're one of God, like, how come we don't fellowship with each other? If we're all underneath one body, how come we don't fellowship with one another? That's something that we as a people should be doing. But even within the churches, we have our own segregation. We have our own separation down to the religion type, and the race. Who was it? I think they said Martin Luther King had said the most segregated day is Sunday, or something like that.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's true. It's very true.
It's true.
So
the interesting thing, I just wanted to say something about that the interesting thing is that although there is that worldwide connection with witnesses, the segregation piece is still really there, because the leadership, and we talk about this all the time with, different businesses, leadership is white, leadership is white. So it's not very nice that you're in Africa and you're in, a Latin American country and you want to be a Jehovah's Witness, but you're not going to be in like upper management. Okay.
It's like that chart. So, like, we like diversity. Everybody down at the bottom, brown, white,
that's
black.
Right.
And as you get to the top, it just gets whiter and whiter. It's like, that's not diversity.
Exactly. And some of the teachings, that they used to teach us in the Watchtower, they have bias, like I remember them, a old white man who came, he was, they call it a circuit overseer. So he like manages like, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 congregations in an area. And he came talking about how women shouldn't wear their hair in braids, and basically like talking to Black women, like, where did you get this from? And,
right.
There's just, and then he used to talk about music. Witnesses always said, oh, we shouldn't listen to music that has a loud, insistent beat. Like they're trying to hint
because you can't
like,
keep up, because you can't clap
rap
on
music. Right. So it's like anything that's like Black culture is like viewed as like lesser than. And, I felt that as a kid.
What about the tambourine? Did you have the tambourine going?
No tambourines.
No drums.
Nothing.
Lord have mercy. That's
just a little like.
That's Black Church 101. Put that tambourine in your child hand. Let them get the little tambourine going, and then the 1 and the 2.
Yeah, there's nothing about a witness service that's like a Black church. It is not a Black church. Yeah.
Wow.
No.
Wow. I'm learning so much more, like, just having this conversation. I know we had, discussions like this offline, but just to learn a lot more about it. And it's just like really painting that picture of learning about someone else's culture, and also bringing forth the forefront today, because I think a lot of times we just go through the motion of like, as a kid, we're put into this faith and we're just like, we don't really challenge it. Some things may be unsettling, but we just go through the motions. It's like, oh, okay, that's accepted. And then when we get a chance to go into adulthood, we have the opportunity to either decide to walk away from the faith, or we have to decide to like stay within it. And most of us, we stay within it for a few years. And then as we progress in life, that's when we start to we kind of look at things in a full picture of, hey, this is just not right. I knew something wasn't right as a kid, and as I came into my early adulthood, but now I'm fully standing on like, this is was not right. So what were the things as an adult now that you see as like things that made you want to either stop being within the religion, or just kind of like just have like a not a negative perspective, but more of an adult perspective of the religion where it just didn't sit right with you?
Well, I think I have to give like a little bit of background about that because there's two things that I think were key. But first of all, when you're become a Jehovah's Witness, and you get baptized, right? I don't know how other churches do it, but once you get baptized as a Jehovah's Witness, you are no longer allowed to question any of the doctrines, right? You've heard the word apostate, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you question the doctrines and tell people about it, they'll say that you're an apostate and you'll be disfellowshipped, like I said, kicked out. And also, if you violate any of the rules, if you have sex before marriage, if you, I don't know, or were violent somehow, if you smoke cigarettes and get caught, you can get removed from the religion for these things. Okay. And the problem is that, like I said, that will cut you off from all of your friends, family, leave you isolated. It's a pretty horrible experience. They also encourage people to get baptized at a very young age. So I got baptized when I was 12,
Mm-hmm.
along with a big group of kids. So you can imagine kids getting baptized at that young age. They haven't even hit puberty yet, right? So what happened was, by the time that we were 18, 19, I mean, probably half of a group of 20 were already disfellowshipped. And if you can
Wow.
imagine people now 20 years old, not talking to their parents, just out on their own, that sort of thing went on. So
Wow.
that was, so what that did to me was, and what it is meant to do is to scare you into staying. And it works very well. The threat of being disfellowshipped really does scare you into staying.
Wow.
So regardless of your questions that you have or your doubts that you have, you just think to yourself, well, I don't want to have that problem. I saw what happened to, sister so and so. I'm not going to have that happen to me. So when I was in about like 19 or so, I started thinking things through to myself, but I didn't really allow myself to check into things that I thought were untrue until I
Mhm.
was out of the house. I moved out when I was 24. And at that point, I allowed myself to start looking into some of the doctrines that I thought were not true, right? So one day I went to the library, and Jehovah's Witnesses have this doctrine in it. It basically is the doctrine that they use to prove that they are the one true religion, right? And it involves a bunch of complex scriptures that supposedly prove that Jesus returned to rule the earth in 1914. Okay.
Hmm.
Your face. Right. Okay. I'm not going to get all into
1914.
it. Right. And the importance of that date is that they use that date, 1914, with some other scriptures to prove that the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses that were living at that time were like chosen by God to care for true Christians. Right. So
That's different than what I learned, but go ahead. I'm learning.
it's different from a lot of people. So everything, all they get to this 1914 date based on like this biblical date of the fall of Babylon, which they've always told us since we were kids. Babylon fell in 607 BCE, 607 BCE, 607 BCE. So I go to the library and I'm like, well, let me just see if this date is correct, you know, because in my mind I'm like, the only way that they can prove that they supposedly have God's blessing to be an authority is through this 1914 date. So let me go to the library. I went to the library, I get all these books out, I had 4 or 5 books of archaeology, and I'm looking, when is the fall of Babylon? And I'm looking, and it's a completely different date. I was like, what? And like all the books said the same thing. So I'm thinking to myself, well, where did Jehovah's Witnesses get this 607 BCE? Like
Hmm.
everybody else is saying 586 BC, totally different date, which would change up all their prophecies and all their doctrines. And it just struck me then. I was like, they're just lying. That's it. Because if all these archaeologists and experts say this is when this event happened, you know, I'm going to believe the experts. Why would I believe you? I think you're
Right.
lying. That was a really important thing for me. It really changed. It just confirmed to me my suspicion that they weren't truthful. They weren't honest people that I was dealing with and working with. So that was the first thing. Yeah. And then the second thing, like that was like the erosion of my real belief, of any real belief in the faith part of it, that like this
Right.
doctrine is true.
That's probably
But
like
then
a
I kind of
roof
hung.
shaking.
It was. But then I hung around because, like I said, just fellowshipping, right? I don't want to deal with that. And then I was like, I'm living my life. At this point, I was single. I was living in an apartment. I had my friends. Um, but after a while, I started to get tired and I got in trouble, Jehovah's Witness type trouble. I made the very big, bad mistake of like kissing and hugging on my boyfriend of 2 years. Okay. A terrible person. So when you get in trouble like that, you're brought before what they call a judicial committee. I don't know if they have anything like this in another church. What the judicial committee is, it's 3 men, 3 elders who are like the ministers, right? And they'll come and they sit with you, and you're supposed to tell them your story of whatever you did. By yourself, you sit and tell them your story, and then they decide if you can stay or if you're going to get kicked out or if they're going to
Wow.
give you some other kind of punishment.
Wow.
So what happened to me was that when all this happened, I had already broke up with my boyfriend when they found out all that, whatever they felt like they found out about us. And so instead of me having to sit with 3 men, I had to sit with 6 men by myself. And okay, I told my story. My story is like I was kissing my boyfriend, you know what I'm saying? That was basically the beginning and end of the story. And then they proceeded to ask me a bunch of other questions that they said that they had to ask me. All kinds of sexual questions about all kinds of sexual things, you know, that I did not do, you know, and it was humiliating. It was humiliating, and I was by myself, and I wasn't old enough, you know, and I didn't have the same. I wasn't the person I am now, where I would have just walked out and cussed everybody out. I
Mm-hmm.
sat there and I took it. I sat there and I took it because I was afraid of this fellowshipping. And to me, once I came out of that, I didn't get disfellowshipped. They gave me some other minor punishments, but I never felt the same way about the religion ever after that. I felt like I had been violated. That's what it felt like. And I never forgave those people for for doing that individually, and I felt like the whole organization was to blame because they put these rules into place to where I would be stuck in a position like that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
with a single woman and 6 men, basically just, in my opinion, it was just being disgusting. That's what it felt like.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's like intimidation. Like, these men aren't your father. Okay. It's not like they have any heaven or hell to put you in. But I guess at that point, they felt the need to like either correct you because they didn't want you to be out there being a Jezebel or, being a whore and bringing the stain to the Kingdom Hall's name. It's just
Right.
crazy to me.
And then they asked me questions like, like, did I do this sexual thing? Did I enjoy it? Did I have an orgasm? Child, I didn't even know what an orgasm was. That's how
Wow.
much of a virgin I was. I was like, huh? And later, when I had time to process it, I'm like, well, what difference does it make? Even if I had been having sex with this person, what difference does it make if I enjoyed it or not? Like, what is
Hmm.
going on in your mind? I decided there was a bunch of perverts. That's what I decided.
Right, right. That's very
Yeah.
unfortunate, and I'm pretty sure you're not the first female that to ever go through something like that, and
Mhm.
that doesn't, I mean, it happens even within the Christian faith as well. I'm sitting here thinking about like I never had to really sit down, but I remember at one point there was a cousin of myself. She was in a relationship with this man who was older than her, and they were both consenting adults of being in a relationship. And she was the one that was put on the stage as far as like as if she was wrong for being in a relationship with this man. And the man pursued her, and they're both of age. Yes, she was younger than him, and he was probably like 10 years older than her, but at the same time, she was still of age to make the decision that she wanted to be with this man. And the
Right,
church and
exactly.
the church leadership, who was a man, brought her before and was dragging her through. And that you never know, like, how that can make an impact on someone's relationship with God. You know, that does that's really unfortunate. Very
Yeah,
unfortunate.
it's what business is it really of anybody what decision a grown adult makes? Because if your
Hmm.
relationship is between you and God, I don't need you to judge me. God would have that covered, right?
Right.
So, what is the point of me sitting down and confessing anything to anybody?
Right.
Okay. Because when I read the Bible, and I did read the Bible, that was another thing. I read the Bible. I read a lot of stuff that I didn't read in a watchtower. And what I read in the Bible was basically the relationship is supposed to be me and Jesus, you
Hmm.
know, and Jehovah's Witnesses have Jesus separate from God, but that's it. There's nobody else that's supposed to be involved in there. So why are you all trying to run my life?
Right. Exactly. Um, I know in the Bible it talks about minding your own business, and that's in Thessalonians and something. Don't quote me now, people. Whoever want to watch this, don't quote me. I know it's in Thessalonians because that was the first time that I ever read the scripture, and it was like in the message format, and it said mind your business. It was like, not the Bible having shade, not the Bible trying to tell you mind your business. Exactly what we're supposed to do, because like like growing up, I always heard every man has to work on their own soul salvation. Like your mom can't do it for you, your dad can't do it for you, you have your own life to live. So what is it that we have to pass judgment on others and crucify others instead of uplifting? It's not like you were selling yourself. I could see if they was like, yo, Maya, you out here prostituting. You can't do that, Maya. Like, what is it that we need to do to teach you? And number one, a man shouldn't be able to talk to you without the presence of a woman. Why? With all of that, then their good is being evilly spoken of. Where they do that at?
Exactly. Exactly. And the interesting thing to me is that if you're a single woman, as a witness, these men can do whatever they want to you. They can just take you in the back and drag you and talk about whatever. But as soon as you get married, then they're like, oh no, we have to go through your husband. You know? So once I got married, I had more protection. But that made me think to myself, well, what would have you go and feel like you could really disrespect young women like that? And a lot
Right,
of women complain as witnesses, like, you should be able to take somebody else with you if you're going to sit
right,
before these people, another woman, to make sure that nothing happens that's out of place.
right. So do you know, as of right now, like has there been any changes where like a female has more of that type of approach now when it comes down to single women, or is it still like the same standard?
Oh, no, it's the same. No, absolutely nothing of that's changed. I hate to say this has made me feel better, but maybe I would say it has made me feel validated. Is when it happened to me, I felt like I was the only one, and then I would tell some people about it, and they're like, "You're the only one." But since since moving away from the religion and reading a lot of people's stories, it's happened to many, many, many other witness women. It's a pretty common story, but unfortunately, there's nothing has changed about it.
Mm. So I just wanted to, like, as we were talking about that, I just wanted to transition into the conversation. I'm just going to read it, where I wrote that deconstruction is the systematic pulling apart of one's belief system for examination. So a lot of times, like, I think, we had the conversation offline about, having the conversation about deconstructing our faith. And I think I told you, I said, well, I think I'm like the only person, or like, as far as like Black people don't talk about deconstructing their faith. And you're like, girl, there's a lot of podcasts, or there's like different white people talk about deconstructing your faith all the time. And it's just like, it made me think like a lot of times we are so we're so much into this religion base of it that it becomes our life, and that if we say no to it, or we shun away from it, or we shut things down, then all of a sudden we're hell bound. And that's not the truth. That as an adult we have the right to take a back seat and just kind of look at it at our religion that we were raised in, to say, okay, this is what I'm going to take from it, this is what I'm going to walk away from. As a matter of fact, I don't want nothing to do with this religion at all. I'm going to do this religion. So what was like, what inspires you to kind of keep deconstructing your faith, or what was your overall outcome after you kind of like went through that process of with your faith walk?
Well, I mean, it took me a long time. I probably really started picking things apart when I was probably about 15 years ago. And it's taken me up until maybe 5 years ago to really walk away. Um, and like I said, it's because there's so much tied into the religion, so much family, so much connections. But I had to do it because I kept having negative experiences, of people in the religion, elders, people in authority, positions, harassing me,
Mm-hmm.
basically, harassing me, harassing my family, harassing my husband. Um, and then I began to feel depressed, depressed and hopeless. Because if you can imagine, I know the doctrine is not right at this point, but I still feel like I can't talk to anyone who's not a witness. So now I don't have any friends,
Mm-hmm.
because I can't be myself around witnesses. Because if I was to be myself, I would get condemned. But I can't be with anybody else, And then I have people harassing me when I go to the Kingdom Hall. I'm worrying about my kids. I didn't want my kids to grow up with the fear of Armageddon. I didn't want my kids to feel like they can't play basketball if they want to, or they can't have friends, or they can't go to college. And at some point, it just became impossible for me to keep doing it, you know.
It's so unfortunate, to have to go through that process. So what are some, like, I just want to circle back. So when it came down to deconstructing your faith, you had those negative experiences, and then you also compared what was written in the Bible to what was being told to you, and then also, like you said, within the history books, what was being said to you and what was in the actual history books. So at that point, was there any other thing that you kind of any other skill, or any certain particular thing that you did as far as deconstructing your faith, or breaking it down even further, of just saying like, this is not the religion for me?
Well, I I began to do a lot of listening to podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
YouTube videos, reading books, watching shows about cults. I find it to be fascinating. And I realized as I was watching them about these different cults and high control religious groups that they sound an awful lot like my religion,
Mm.
and that really just like it just kind of like woke me up, like, wait a second, like, this is more than just I'm uncomfortable as a Jehovah's Witness, like, this is a cult. you know and when it came down to the point of my relationship with my blood family, like my mother, my sister, is falling apart because you know I don't believe much in this religion anymore. That's when it was like it really just fell apart for me. There's just nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
If a religion is so controlling that it can break you away from your blood family, it's it's just not
Then why
worth it.
stay in it? Yeah, why stay in it?
Yeah, right.
And it's unfortunate too, because people don't see it that way either. They don't see it in a way of that I'm your blood. You know, there's nothing's going to change that. So why allow this to kind of interfere with our relationship?
Exactly. So I stay in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I probably for about the last 2 years, I just stay in therapy. I talk about it all the time with my therapist, and it's really been eye opening. Like, there's so many things that you have to like slowly untangle from your life,
Mm-hmm.
to really fully come out. I probably thought that I was over everything 3 years ago, but I really am still getting over, this lifetime of this religion. I believe that part of it for me was traumatic for me. I think the isolation really was hard on me, and it contributes to anxiety that I
Mm-hmm.
have, and and the isolation also has contributed to, here I am in my 40s, and it's like I'm starting to now create real relationships, because the relationships that I had before with witnesses were not real friendships, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a conditional friendship, that is not friendship at all, you
Right.
know. And so now here I am in my 40s, trying to start all over again. And it's hard, but it's good, because now I can live an authentic life. I can be who I am. I can show up as myself. I can dress how I want. You know, I can take the time to do the things that interest me. Let me tell you, I love Saturdays, because for like 35 years, I had to get up every Saturday morning, get dressed at like 8 o'clock, and go to meet the group, they call it, at the Kingdom Hall, to go preaching and walking around from door to door. And
Wow.
it's like your whole Saturday gets blown. You're out there until maybe like 12 o'clock, then you're tired, and then you got to get up on Sunday and kind of like do it all over again. Like, I love Saturday. I just go to the mall, I walk by myself, and as I'm walking, I'm like, this is the best day ever.
Right. Right.
you know? Yeah. And people just don't understand like how good it is to me, because like it's just not something I had before.
That's crazy. And we take that you never know what someone is going through, and you never know like the impact that it brings. Because like just like you said, the little Saturday, like that's a lot, that you appreciate, and that's the time that you do get back. You're reclaiming your time throughout this whole
Yeah.
process. And I'm glad that right now that you're in the space of um, living your lifestyle, and that's hence why I named the podcast True Brand Life. The life part came because that's the only domain that the webpage it gave me. But then I was like, oh yeah, that kind of works out, because you're living your true authentic life. And I think what kind of helped me was we don't get a chance to talk about it. We don't get a chance to talk about the negative impacts that that religion has made on us. We don't get a chance to talk about and really live in our truth. We may talk about it with our loved ones, or we may talk about with a small portion of people, but literally we'll be all going through the same thing and won't talk about it, and we're suffering. And that's, like you said, you're going through the isolation, and unfortunately you're going through isolation alone, but I'm pretty sure there's other people that's just like you, that's like, look, this is not right and I want to leave, or that it's time for me to cut ties, but just can't, and they don't have that the strength. And just like you said, by finding the resources that you need, or the resources that you use to kind of help you get there. And then um not all people think about therapy. That's important. Some people think that you have to go to therapy because you're crazy, or you got some real mental issues going, but there are certain things that we as a whole and we as women go through that's traumatizing, and we kind of sweep it under the rug and smile and do whatever we need to do to go throughout the day. But it's still something that needs to be talked about.
And I think, like, you're talking about therapy, and a lot of people don't think about therapy. And I think a lot of people in Christian religions, probably especially Black people in Christian religions,
Mhm.
don't think about therapy, because it's not considered the thing to do in the
Right.
culture. With witnesses, and not all witnesses. The culture used to be when I was a kid, that you weren't really supposed to go to a therapist because then they might talk to you about something that witnesses wouldn't approve of. So when I was in my 20s and I was what they call a pioneer, and I was working full time, and then I would get up early in the mornings, like 5 o'clock in the morning, a couple weekdays, and I would go preaching until it was time to go to work at 8 o'clock. And then at the end of the day, I used to teach. I would leave my job and I would go back out preaching and stay out till like 7, 8 o'clock at night. And then I was preaching all day Saturday from 5 in the morning to 5 at night. And I
Oh
was preaching
God.
on Sunday. So I got really burnt out, and depressed, and it was awful. But the witnesses were constantly saying, "This is the best way of life." You're tired, but you're a happy tired. They're telling you how to feel, but really, I felt miserable and depressed. And then on top of that, if I feel depressed, if I feel sad, then it's like, well, that's your fault. You don't pray enough. There's something wrong with you. And it takes a while to realize, and wait a second, it's not me.
Right,
It's
right.
this crazy thing that I'm in. I would encourage anybody who's going through it to talk to a therapist, even if it's hard for them, because you need to talk to somebody. And a lot of people, like you said, don't want to talk about it, but your therapist will talk about it.
Right, right. And like we didn't even get into it. And I feel like, we just had like this hour of time just to talk and we were just we glossed over like you could go anywhere with this conversation from like you said, like the pictures that you saw as a child, what kind of impact that made from you being cornered and talking to these men and they're asking you these questions about your you and your relationship with your boyfriend, like how that impacts, like all that stuff is traumatizing, even with like like we could talk about the separation with race. And so when it comes down to deconstructing your faith, like you really have to kind of like really comb through it, because a lot of times like people don't realize like all those little things that occurred made an impact, like all that stuff stuck to you. Like I think about even growing up as a child. I started church when I was in third grade. But then, I had a family that was we started out at a family church, and then we went to another family church who was part of that family church, and then that family had beef, so we got caught in the crossfire. And it was just like, somebody had said something about just because we don't go to the same church no more doesn't mean that we can't speak to one another. All that plays in part, because it's like, am I part of a gang? Like, because I don't go to this church no more, I'm going to this church. So now you don't want to talk to me. Then we end up going to like, another church that was totally out of the norm. So then it just felt like I was out of the wave of what was going on in the Black churches. And all that stuff takes place when it comes down to deconstructing your faith. And I just hope that, like you and like the guests that listen to the podcast or this playback, that they take the time to really ask tough questions about where they are in their religion, where they are, what was taught to them, what's the truth. And then also just adding the layer of putting some actual sustainable resources. Like you said, you took the time to, how many people do you know that really would have took the time to read other resources to say, hey, this right here is contradicting? Not too many people kind of go off of what was told to them. And that's why we have to read for ourselves and get that knowledge for ourselves in order to make an educated decision and the best decision for us.
Yeah. And I think too, something I learned in therapy is that from spending so much time in a religion that tells you what to do, what to think, and how to feel, that you become disconnected from
Mm-hmm.
your own feelings, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you'll have a feeling, but you'll ignore it because you're like, oh, you know, God doesn't approve of this feeling, or if I was living my life better, I wouldn't have this feeling. So you begin
Right.
to be
That happens a lot.
totally, yeah, disconnect. You're just disconnected. And I would encourage people to really think about how you feel, because just because you're going to, this church or this kingdom hall and they're saying from the platform This is the best way of life. All true Christians are happy. Don't you just love this meeting? Like, feel what you're feeling. Did you really love that meeting? Because eventually it caught to me like, no, I didn't love this meeting. I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
boring.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was nonsense.
I thought
And
it
when
was
you
whack.
start
I
to
give it a
connect,
0.
exactly, like, and when you connect with your feelings, then you realize, wait, something funny is going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's not right.
Mm-hmm. And see, that's another way that you can go right into another conversation. I won't hold you long, but you made me think back to when I was going to this church as a teenager, and the pastor was like, if you're not going to church on Sunday, then you're not saved. Like, pretty much was like, Sunday is God's day, and I had to work. And so I started a job, and like they had required me to work, and I was like so afraid about like missing out on going to church. So then I found a church that was giving out a 7 o'clock service. So I rolled up in there to the 7 o'clock service. It wasn't my church, but then I would go to work. But then pandemic life happened. Fast forward 20 years, pandemic life happens, and it's like, well, what church can I go to now? Church is closed. So where does that make sense at? And so the church I go to now is predominantly old. I haven't been back since the pandemic. But at the same time, it's like I still have a relationship with the Lord. I still make time to get into my word and sing songs and pray. But at the same time, that's my personal relationship. And if people are on the outside judging, and I don't care if they are, let them judge, because I think that's the culture of church, that sometimes we feel as though like what others believe and what others think, and we carry that on our shoulders. And even though we say, oh, we don't care, that stuff weighs. It weighs
It
on you.
does. It's like peer pressure. But then when you think about it, if you was on a desert island by yourself, you can't have a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you really need church for? I mean, church might be nice, but it's not like if you don't go there,
Right.
you can't have a relationship with God. You can have a relationship with God in a ditch, in the
Right.
dark by yourself.
Right. Right.
So what's really good?
Right. Or like my boyfriend had asked me the question. He said, well, what about those people in those deep jungles and stuff that never had the Bible? What about them? Are they going to hell? Like, I don't get this. I don't get this religion talk, and it's like, well, what? Wait a minute. I don't know. Because then you get tripped up on like what was told to you, and then you be so prepared and people get offended so easily, especially, oh, not my God. Not my God. And the whole time they're not even quoting God. They're quoting what man had told them, what man said. It's not even Bible.
That's what really surprised me, is that my crazy behind, and me, I like to read, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, let me read this Bible. Now, I'm not going to lie. I did read the Old Testament once, but when I got back into it, I only did New Testament. I wasn't trying to go through all that.
Right.
But when I was reading, I was like, wait a minute. Like, they don't say that. Like, they're saying the opposite of what it says here,
Right.
in this Bible. You know, they're doing the opposite of what it says here. And what really struck me was that witnesses act just like the Pharisees in the Bible.
Oh
Jesus
God.
came and Jesus was like, y'all need to stop making up all these rules and making people's lives hard. The message is simple: love God, love your neighbor. That's what his message was. So then I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. But I'm going to this Kingdom Hall and they're making up all these rules and making my life hard. This is wrong. It's not even God. It's not even this Bible.
Right. Right.
What is this?
Right.
And you're stressing me out about this.
Right. And it's a shame because they do it right there in the church too, with the Bible, with God's word. You can't do this, you can't do that, and it's just like, since when? So, what are some, taken to a positive change? Like, where do you feel hopeful about what's next for you as you're continuing on this journey?
Man, I feel great. I just feel better and better. The last meeting I went to was August in 2019, and I feel like I have a chance to live my life for the first time, and I don't have to feel guilty about it. So I'm involved in a lot of things right now because I don't have to spend all my time going to meetings. Witnesses go to meetings a couple nights a week, like church a couple nights a week. They go on Sundays. They have things called conventions. Like I said, you see Jehovah's Witnesses in the street preaching. They have to do that during the month. Some people do it more than others. Like, then if you were like a really, really good witness, you're supposed to be like reading witness books and things, and they come out with books like every other day. So you can spend your whole life doing that, and you never have a chance to focus on what you want to do. So now I get to do what I want to do. I take opera lessons. I've been writing my blog, I was telling you about. My husband and I are starting businesses. We're focusing on, getting wealth for our family, for the future, because we believe that there is a future for us, in the here and now. We're not just worried about the end of the world. So we get to live, we get to go on vacation. We get to enjoy life. And that's new for me.
Right. And I'm so appreciative of you. And I thank you for coming out to just speak to me on, actually, this is my first ever episode. So, woohoo!
Yay!
First ever. We've been talking about this for a long time. I think before the pandemic, it changed to a podcast during the pandemic, but to actually put into practice and actually do the work. So I'm so appreciative of you coming out to share your story and just to talk to me. And hopefully for those that will see this, will be able to receive, your message and be able to be encouraged. And if there's any questions or anything like that, I'd be happy to bring you back. And then we could actually do like a live session and get people involved to like type in, and we could kind of like talk about it as we go along. But is there anything else that you want to share? Anything that you want to promote, such as your business or social media at this time?
Well, I'll put my blog out there, even though it's very, very new. And hopefully by the time this airs anywhere, I'll actually have one full post up there and not just a picture. But my blog is called losingit.org, losing-it.org. And the reason I called it that is like, I feel like it's about stories, and I want to share my story as a Black woman leaving this Jehovah's Witness religion, and I want to allow at some point other Black women to share their stories, because I think there's an importance to hear like a Black perspective, especially when it comes to these conservative Christian religions, because there is a race element. We didn't really talk too much about it today, but
Right.
you and I have talked about it, and I feel like it's important for Black women to share their stories of what they've come through. So that's my blog.
Right.
And thank you so much for having me on here. It was so nice. It was fun, and I'm really excited for you.
I'm excited too. I'm excited to see how this thing goes, and we'll just take it from there. But I'll be happy to bring you back so we could talk about your blog and then get further into some other things. Okay?
All right.
All righty. I'm going to end it right now.